Good evening, and welcome to Sleepy Sunday School. Tonight we are going to be telling the story of the Old Testament, the oldest continuous story in Western civilization, passed down for thousands of years around fires, in homes, and in the great stone temples of ancient cities. It is a story about creation and catastrophe, about promise and failure, and about a God who refuses to let go of the people he loves. If you can, please leave a comment with where in the world you are listening from and drop a like if you enjoy these. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future stories. Now get comfortable and let the story carry you gently off to sleep. The Old Testament, the story of God and his people. Before anything existed, there was God. That is where the story starts. Not with a world, not with light or darkness or matter or energy, just God, existing outside of time, before time, in a state that human language was never really designed to describe. The ancient Hebrews called him Elohim in these opening verses, a plural form used in a singular sense, a grammatical mystery that theologians have wrestled with ever since, and then God spoke. The opening lines of Genesis are among the most recognized words in all of human literature. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. What follows is a 6-day sequence of creation that has fascinated readers for millennia. On the first day, light. On the second, the sky and the separation of waters. On the third, dry land and vegetation. On the fourth, the sun, moon, and stars. On the fifth, the creatures of the sea and sky. On the sixth, land animals, and finally, humanity. After each act of creation, the text pauses and says the same thing. God saw that it was good. That phrase is easy to read past, but it matters. The world was not an accident. It was not a battlefield between competing divine forces. It was not something God was indifferent to. It was good. It was intentional. It was loved from the moment it existed. The creation of humanity is described with special care. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Then he formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man became a living creature. His name was Adam, which in Hebrew simply means man or humanity. God placed him in a garden called Eden, a word that carries the sense of delight or pleasure. And God saw that it was not good for the man to be alone, so he made a woman. The text says God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and formed the woman from it. When Adam woke and saw her, he said something that sounds almost like the first poem in human history. "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Her name was Eve, meaning living or life-giver." They lived together in the garden, naked and unashamed, in perfect harmony with each other, with the world, and with God. It was a state of existence the Hebrew scriptures describe with a single word, shalom. Usually translated as peace, it means something closer to completeness. Everything in its right place. Nothing broken, nothing missing. It did not last. The third chapter of Genesis introduces the serpent. The text calls it the most crafty of all the wild creatures God had made, and it came to Eve with a question. Did God really say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Eve explained that they could eat from any tree except one, the tree in the middle of the garden. God had said that if they ate from it or even touched it, they would die. The serpent said, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." She looked at the fruit. She saw that it was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, that it was desirable to make one wise. She took it and ate. She gave some to her husband who was with her. He ate, and their eyes were opened, but not in the way the serpent had promised. What they suddenly saw was their own nakedness. They felt something new, shame. They sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. When God came walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, they hid. The conversation that followed is one of the most quietly devastating passages in Scripture. God asked where they were. Adam said he had hidden because he was afraid. God asked if he had eaten from the forbidden tree. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. The consequences that followed were immediate and lasting. The serpent was cursed. Eve was told that childbirth would be painful and that her relationship with her husband would be marked by struggle. Adam was told that the ground itself was now cursed on his account, that it would produce thorns and thistles, that work would be hard, that he would return to the dust from which he came. But before they were sent out of the garden, God did something unexpected. He made garments of skin for them and clothed them. Even in the moment of judgment, he covered their shame. They were sent east of Eden, and an angel with a flaming sword was placed at the entrance to guard the way back to the tree of life. The garden was closed, but the story was not over. If anything, it had just begun. Adam and Eve had 2 sons. The older was named Cain, a farmer. The younger was Abel, a shepherd. Both brought offerings to God. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the best he had. Cain brought some of the fruit of the ground, not specified as the best or the first. The text says God had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Cain was furious. His face fell. God spoke to him directly. "Why are you angry? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Cain did not rule over it. He spoke to his brother in the field, and then he rose up and killed him. When God asked Cain where Abel was, Cain answered with what may be the most famous deflection in human history: "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The blood of Abel cried out from the ground. Cain was cursed to be a wanderer, a fugitive on the earth. But God placed a mark on him so that no one who found him would kill him. Even here, even for the first murderer, there was protection. Cain went and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And the human story kept going, generation after generation, spreading across the earth, building cities, making music, working metal, multiplying in every direction. But something had been broken, and it kept breaking. By the time we reach the 6th chapter of Genesis, the world has become something that grieves God. The text uses an almost startling word. It says God was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So God decided to send a flood to wipe the earth clean and start again. But there was one man who had found favor in God's eyes. His name was Noah. God told Noah to build an enormous vessel, an ark, and to bring into it his family and 2 of every kind of animal on earth, male and female. Noah did everything God commanded. It is one of the quieter acts of faith in the Bible, carried out over what scholars estimate may have been decades, with no explanation for why it was necessary other than God said so. The rain began. It fell for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters rose until even the mountains were covered. Everything that breathed on the surface of the earth died. Only Noah and those with him in the ark survived. Then the waters receded. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sent out a raven and then a dove to see if the ground was dry. When the dove returned with an olive leaf in its beak, Noah knew the waters had subsided. They came out of the ark onto a changed world. Noah built an altar and offered burnt offerings to God. And God made a covenant, a formal binding promise. He would never again destroy the earth with a flood. As a sign of this promise, he set a rainbow in the clouds. Every time clouds appear and a rainbow follows, the text says, God will see it and remember his covenant with every living creature on earth. It is the first covenant in Scripture. It would not be the last. After the flood, humanity spread and multiplied again. Families became clans, clans became peoples, peoples became nations, languages diversified, cultures formed. And somewhere in the ancient land of Shinar, which we now call southern Iraq, people decided to build a city with a tower that would reach to the heavens. The stated reason is telling. They said, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." God came down to see the city and the tower. He said nothing that they proposed to do will be impossible for them. So he confused their language, so they could no longer understand each other. The project stopped. The people scattered. The place was called Babel, which sounds like the Hebrew word for confused. It is also the Hebrew name for Babylon. In a few lines, the story explains both the diversity of human language and the fractured nature of human civilization. Out of this scattered, confused, broken world, God was about to call one man and make him the beginning of something entirely new. His name was Abram. He lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous city in what is now southern Iraq. He was already 75 years old when God spoke to him. God said, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." No explanation was given. No map was provided. Just a command and a promise. Abram went. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all they owned, and he set out toward Canaan, a land already populated by other peoples. When he arrived, God appeared to him and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram built an altar there to mark the moment. But years passed, decades passed. Abram and Sarai had no children. Sarai was barren. She gave Abram her Egyptian servant Hagar to bear a child on her behalf, as was the custom of the time. Hagar conceived and bore a son named Ishmael. But Ishmael was not the child God had promised. When Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again. He changed his name. Abram, meaning exalted father, became Abraham, meaning father of many nations. Sarai became Sarah, meaning princess. And God told Abraham that Sarah, at 90 years old, would bear a son. His name would be Isaac. Abraham fell on his face and laughed. Sarah, listening from inside the tent, also laughed. And God said, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" A year later, Isaac was born. When Isaac was a young man, God gave Abraham the most devastating command in his story. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering." Abraham rose early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his servants and Isaac. He cut the wood for the offering himself, and he went to the mountain God had told him about. As they climbed, Isaac noticed something. He said, "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God will provide for himself the lamb, my son." Abraham built the altar. He laid the wood. He bound Isaac. He laid him on the altar. He raised the knife, and then a voice called from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He took the ram and offered it instead. He named that place, "The Lord will provide." God confirmed his covenant with Abraham one more time. "I will surely bless you and multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." The rabbis call this passage the Akedah, the binding. Christians would later read it as a shadow of something yet to come. Isaac grew up, married a woman named Rebekah, and had twin sons who struggled with each other even before they were born. The older was Esau, a hunter, a man of the open fields. The younger was Jacob, quieter, a man of tents. Jacob's name means he who grasps the heel, because he was born holding his brother's heel. It also means supplanter, one who takes the place of another. Both meanings would define his life. Jacob twice took what was not naturally his. First, he bought Esau's birthright for a bowl of stew when Esau came in from the fields hungry and impulsive. Then, at his mother Rebekah's urging, he disguised himself as Esau and tricked their elderly, nearly blind father Isaac into giving him the firstborn's blessing. When Esau discovered what had happened, he wept bitterly and swore to kill Jacob. Jacob fled north to his mother's family in Haran. That night, sleeping alone in the wilderness with a stone for a pillow, he had a dream. He saw a ladder set up between earth and heaven, and angels of God were ascending and descending on it. At the top stood God, who repeated the covenant he had made with Abraham and Isaac. "I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Jacob woke and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." He set up his stone as a pillar and named the place Bethel, house of God. Jacob spent the next 20 years in Haran, working for his uncle Laban, marrying 2 of his daughters, building a family of 12 sons and 1 daughter. His wives were Leah and Rachel. He loved Rachel deeply, and had worked 7 years to earn her hand, only to be deceived on the wedding night into marrying Leah instead. He then worked 7 more years for Rachel. The complications of that household produced 12 sons who would become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. On his way back to Canaan after 20 years away, Jacob received word that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Terrified, Jacob sent his family ahead across the river Jabbok and spent the night alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Who the man was is left mysterious. He could not overpower Jacob, so he touched the socket of his hip and put it out of joint. Still Jacob would not let go. The man said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" Jacob answered. And the man said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Israel. He who strives with God. Jacob walked away from that encounter limping. But he had a new name, and his family would carry it forever. Of all Jacob's 12 sons, he loved one above the rest. His name was Joseph. Jacob gave him a richly ornamented robe, sometimes called a coat of many colors. Joseph had dreams, vivid prophetic dreams, and he was unwise enough to tell them to his brothers, dreams in which sheaves of grain bowed down to his sheaf, in which the sun and moon and 11 stars bowed before him. His brothers already resented him. This pushed them over the edge. When the opportunity came, they seized Joseph and threw him into a pit. Then, when a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passed by on their way to Egypt, they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. They took his robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped it in the blood, and brought it to their father. Jacob believed his beloved son was dead. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. He served faithfully and rose to a position of trust. But Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of assault when he refused her advances, and he was thrown into prison. In prison, he interpreted the dreams of 2 of Pharaoh's officials. One was restored to his position, one was executed, exactly as Joseph had said. 2 years later, Pharaoh himself began having troubling dreams. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 gaunt ones, 7 plump ears of grain swallowed by 7 thin ones. No one in Egypt could interpret them. The restored official remembered Joseph. Joseph was brought before Pharaoh. He listened to the dreams and said plainly, "The 7 good cows and the 7 good ears are 7 years of abundance. The 7 gaunt cows and the 7 empty ears are 7 years of famine." God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. He advised Pharaoh to appoint someone to gather 1/5 of Egypt's harvest during the 7 good years and store it for the 7 lean years to come. Pharaoh looked at Joseph and said, "Can we find anyone else in whom is the Spirit of God as in this man?" He made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt. At 30 years old, the slave who had been thrown in a pit by his own brothers was given Pharaoh's signet ring and a gold chain and rode through Egypt in a chariot while people called out before him, "Bow the knee." The 7 years of plenty came and went. Joseph stored grain in enormous quantities. Then the famine began. It spread across the whole region, and in Canaan, Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt. He sent 10 of his sons to buy some. He kept the youngest, Benjamin, at home. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately when they arrived. They did not recognize him. He was dressed as an Egyptian official, speaking through an interpreter, a man of power and position. He was not the teenager they had sold into slavery. He tested them. He accused them of being spies. He kept one of them, Simeon, as a hostage and demanded they bring their youngest brother on their next visit. On their way home, they found the silver they had paid for the grain returned in their bags. They were terrified. Jacob refused to send Benjamin. He had already lost Joseph. He would not risk Benjamin. But the famine grew worse. Eventually, he had no choice. He sent his sons back with gifts and double the silver and Benjamin. Joseph saw Benjamin and was so moved he had to leave the room to weep privately. He composed himself, returned, and hosted them at a banquet. He seated them in birth order, which astonished them. He gave them the grain they needed and sent them home, but he hid his own silver cup in Benjamin's sack. His men stopped them on the road, searched their bags, and found the cup. They were brought back. Joseph said the man in whose bag the cup was found would remain as his slave. The rest could go. Then Judah, who had been the one to suggest selling Joseph years before, stepped forward. He said his father had already lost one son whom he believed to be dead. If he lost Benjamin, it would kill him. "Please," Judah said, "take me instead." Joseph could not hold himself together any longer. He cleared the room of all the Egyptians, and he wept so loudly the Egyptians outside could hear it. He said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers could not answer him. They were too afraid. He said, "Come near to me, please. I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. It was not you who sent me here, but God." He embraced them all and wept. Jacob's entire family, 70 people in all, came to Egypt. Joseph settled them in a fertile region called Goshen. Jacob lived out his final years there, old and full of days. He blessed each of his 12 sons before he died. Joseph lived to see his great-grandchildren, and when he was dying, he made his family swear an oath. He said, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." He believed the story was not over. He believed his people would go home. Generations passed. Joseph died, and his brothers died, and all that generation. But the Israelites were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He looked at the growing Israelite population and felt afraid. He said to his people, "The Israelites have become too numerous and too mighty for us. What if they join our enemies and fight against us? They must be dealt with." So the Egyptians enslaved them. They made their lives bitter with hard labor, building cities, working in the fields. And when that was not enough, Pharaoh ordered something more terrible. Every Hebrew boy born was to be thrown into the Nile. A Levite woman hid her newborn son for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she made a basket of papyrus, waterproofed it with tar, placed the baby inside, and set it among the reeds at the edge of the river. She told her daughter to watch from a distance and see what would happen. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe. She saw the basket. She opened it, and the baby cried, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." The baby's sister stepped forward and asked if she should go find a Hebrew woman to nurse him. Pharaoh's daughter said yes. The sister went and brought the child's own mother. Pharaoh's daughter paid the boy's own mother to raise him. And when he was old enough, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son and named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, but he knew who he was. One day he went out to where his people were working and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He looked around, saw no one, and killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day he saw 2 Hebrews fighting each other and tried to intervene. One of them said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was terrified. The thing was known. Pharaoh heard about it and tried to have Moses killed. Moses fled into the wilderness, into the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. The daughters of a Midianite priest came to water their flocks, and some shepherds tried to drive them away. Moses stood up and helped the women and watered their flocks. Their father invited him home. Moses settled there, married one of the daughters, a woman named Zipporah, and began a quiet life as a shepherd. 40 years passed. Moses was tending flocks on the far side of the wilderness near a mountain called Horeb, which is also called Sinai, when he saw something strange. A bush that was on fire but was not burning up. He turned aside to look more closely. God called to him from the middle of the bush. "Moses, Moses," he said, "here I am." God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face. He was afraid to look at God. God said, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I know how much they are suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from Egypt and to bring them into a good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." Moses said, "Who am I that I should go?" God said, "I will be with you." Moses asked what he should say if the Israelites asked who sent him. God gave an answer that has resonated through theology for 3,000 years. Tell them I am who I am sent you. Tell them I am has sent you. In Hebrew, the name is 4 letters, sometimes written YHWH, and is related to the Hebrew verb to be. The ancient Hebrews considered it too sacred to speak aloud and would substitute the word Adonai, meaning Lord. It is where the English word Jehovah comes from. Moses kept offering objections. They will not believe me. I am slow of speech. Please send someone else. God grew angry at that last one, but he provided solutions to each objection. He gave Moses miraculous signs to perform. He appointed Moses' brother Aaron as his spokesman, and he sent them both back to Egypt. The confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh is one of the great dramatic set pieces of the ancient world. Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and said, "The God of Israel says, 'Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.' Pharaoh said, 'Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go.' Instead, Pharaoh made the Israelites work harder. He stopped providing straw for making bricks and ordered them to gather their own straw while keeping their quota the same. The people cried out against Moses. Moses cried out to God, and God said, 'Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh.'" What followed was a series of 10 plagues, each one escalating in severity, each one aimed at demonstrating the power of Israel's God over the gods of Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs swarmed over the land. Gnats rose from the dust. Flies filled Egypt's houses. The livestock of the Egyptians died. The Egyptians broke out in boils. Hail destroyed the crops. Locusts consumed what remained. Thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days, a darkness that could be felt. After each plague, Pharaoh wavered. He seemed about to let the people go. Then he hardened his heart, and the cycle began again. The 10th plague was different. God told Moses that at midnight he would pass through Egypt, and every firstborn son would die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, and also every firstborn of the livestock. There would be a great cry throughout all Egypt, such as there had never been before, and never would be again. But the Israelites would be protected if they followed precise instructions. Each household was to take an unblemished male lamb, 1 year old, and slaughter it at twilight. They were to take the blood and put it on the door frames and the tops of the door frames of their houses. They were to roast the lamb and eat it that night, fully dressed, sandals on, staff in hand, ready to travel. They were to eat it in haste. It was the Lord's Passover. When God saw the blood on the door frame, he would pass over that house, and the plague would not touch it. At midnight, it happened exactly as God had said. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. He said, "Go, leave my people, take your flocks and your herds, and bless me also." The Israelites left so quickly they did not even have time to let their bread rise. They carried their dough in their kneading bowls wrapped in their clothing on their shoulders. They left Egypt with livestock and with silver and gold and clothing that the Egyptians had pressed upon them, eager for them to be gone. They had been in Egypt for 430 years. God led them as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, so they could travel in the dark. But Pharaoh changed his mind. He took 600 of his finest chariots and his entire army and pursued the Israelites. He caught them at the edge of the sea, with water in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them. The people were terrified. They cried out to Moses, "Was there not enough room for graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? Why did you bring us out of Egypt?" Moses said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." God told Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea. Moses stretched it out, and the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and a wall of water on their left. The Egyptians followed them in. God told Moses to stretch out his hand again. He did, and the sea returned. The waters came back and covered the chariots and the horsemen and the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. The Israelites saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And they feared the Lord and believed in him and in Moses his servant. Then Moses and the Israelites sang a song. It begins, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver, he has hurled into the sea. It is one of the oldest pieces of poetry in the Bible. Some scholars believe it may predate the surrounding prose. The people sang it together on the shore of the sea, alive, free, standing on the far side of something they had been unable to cross on their own. Moses' sister Miriam took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. The wilderness was not easy. Almost immediately, the people began to complain. The water at a place called Marah was bitter and undrinkable. They had no food. They said they wished they had died in Egypt, where at least they had sat around pots of meat and eaten bread until they were full. God provided. He made the bitter water sweet. He sent quail in the evening and covered the ground with a strange flaky substance in the mornings that the people called manna, meaning what is it? It tasted like wafers made with honey. It appeared 6 days a week, with a double portion on the 6th day so they could rest on the 7th. It would continue for 40 years until they entered the land of Canaan. Water flowed from a rock. Battles were won when Moses held his arms raised over the fighting and lost when exhaustion caused him to lower them. So Aaron and a man named Hur stood beside him and held his arms up for him through the whole day. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived at the mountain of Sinai. God told Moses to tell the people to consecrate themselves and prepare. On the 3rd day he would come down on the mountain in the sight of all the people. On the 3rd morning there was thunder and lightning and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a trumpet blast so loud that all the people trembled. The mountain was covered in smoke because God descended on it in fire. The whole mountain shook violently. The trumpet grew louder and louder. God called Moses to the top of the mountain, and there he gave them the law. The 10 Commandments come first. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make an idol. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. The people stood at a distance and watched the thunder and lightning and the smoke and heard the trumpet, and they were terrified. Moses received not just the 10 Commandments, but an entire legal code covering property, injury, worship, and social relations. He was also given detailed instructions for building a portable worship structure called the tabernacle, along with its furnishings, its lampstand, its altar, and the Ark of the Covenant, a gold-covered chest that would house the stone tablets of the law. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days. Back in the camp below, the people grew restless. They went to Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for Moses, we do not know what has happened to him." Aaron told them to bring him their gold earrings. He melted them down and fashioned a golden calf. The people said, "These are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt." Aaron built an altar. They sacrificed offerings and sat down to eat and drink and got up to revel. God told Moses what was happening. He was furious. Moses ran down the mountain, carrying the 2 stone tablets on which God had written the commandments with his own hand. He heard the singing before he saw the camp. When he saw the calf and the dancing, he was so angry he threw down the tablets and shattered them at the base of the mountain. He ground the golden calf into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses went back up the mountain. He fell face down before God. He pleaded for the people. He said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." It is a staggering moment of intercession. Moses was willing to be destroyed himself rather than see his people abandoned. God relented. He told Moses to cut 2 new stone tablets, and he wrote the commandments on them again. The covenant was renewed. Moses came down from the mountain with the new tablets. The skin of his face was shining, radiating light from having been in the presence of God, so brightly that the Israelites were afraid to come near him. He put a veil over his face when he spoke to them and took it off when he went in to speak with God. The tabernacle was built according to the exact specifications God had given. The Ark of the Covenant was constructed and placed in the innermost room, the most holy place. When everything was finished and set up, a cloud covered the tent and the glory of God filled the tabernacle so completely that Moses could not enter it. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, the Israelites set out on their journey. If the cloud did not lift, they did not set out. It was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud at night, so all the house of Israel could see it throughout all their journeys. God was traveling with them. The journey from Sinai toward Canaan should have taken weeks. Instead, it took 40 years. The Israelites sent 12 spies into Canaan to scout the land. 10 came back with a frightening report. The cities were fortified and large. The people were powerful. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, they said, and we looked the same to them. 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, gave a different report. The land is exceptionally good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land and give it to us. Do not be afraid of the people of the land. God is with us. The people sided with the 10. They wept through the night. They said they wished they had died in Egypt, or even in the wilderness. They talked about choosing a new leader and going back. God was finished. He told Moses he would strike the people with a plague and start over, making Moses himself into a great nation. Moses interceded again. He said, "If you put these people to death all at once, the nations who have heard this will say the Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them. Please, in accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people." God forgave them. But there was a consequence. None of the people who had seen the miracles in Egypt and in the wilderness and still refused to trust him would enter the promised land. They would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies had explored the land, until the entire faithless generation had died. Their children would inherit what they had refused to believe in. Only Joshua and Caleb, because they had followed God wholeheartedly, would enter. And Moses himself, because he had struck a rock in anger when God told him to speak to it, and because he had not honored God as holy in the sight of the people, would also not be allowed to cross into Canaan. He would see it from a distance, nothing more. Moses led the people for 4 decades in the wilderness. He gave them the laws recorded in Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, a word that means exactly that in Greek. He recited the history of everything God had done for them. He called on heaven and earth to witness that he had set before them life and death, blessing and cursing, and urged them to choose life. When he finished speaking to all Israel, he climbed Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. God showed him the whole land from there, the land flowing with milk and honey, stretching in every direction. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, as the Lord had said. He was buried in a valley in Moab, but no one knows where his grave is to this day. He was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not dim, and his strength had not left him. There has never been a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide from his youth, was now the leader of Israel, and God spoke to him at the beginning of his command with words that have comforted people for 3,000 years. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. The Jordan River was at flood stage. God told Joshua to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant into the river. The moment their feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap far upstream, and the people crossed on dry ground. Their first objective was Jericho, a fortified city with massive walls. God gave Joshua unusual instructions. March around the city once a day for 6 days, with 7 priests carrying trumpets in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around 7 times, and when the priests give a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout. They did it. On the 7th day, after the 7th time around, when the priests sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the people to shout, and the walls of Jericho fell down flat. The conquest of Canaan took years. It was not complete or uniform. Many people groups remained in the land. Joshua distributed territories among the 12 tribes and then called all Israel together for a final address. He told them the history of everything God had done, from Abraham to that very day. He listed the nations God had driven out before them. He gave them a choice. Choose this day whom you will serve, he said, whether the gods your fathers served beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people said, We will serve the Lord. We will obey him. Joshua set up a large stone under an oak tree near Shechem as a witness to the covenant they had made that day. Then Joshua died. He was 110 years old, and he was buried in the land of his inheritance. After Joshua, there was no central leader. The book of Judges records what happened over the next several centuries, and it follows a cycle so consistent it feels almost mathematical. The people would follow God and prosper. Then the generation that remembered what God had done would die. The next generation would abandon God and begin worshiping the gods of the surrounding nations. God would allow an enemy nation to oppress them. The people would cry out in suffering. God would raise up a deliverer, a judge, to rescue them. They would follow God again while the judge lived. Then the judge would die, and the cycle would begin again. The judges included Deborah, a woman who led Israel to victory when the male leaders were too afraid, and whose victory was completed by another woman named Jael. Gideon, who defeated an army of 135,000 with just 300 men armed with torches and clay jars. Jephthah, a son of a prostitute driven out by his brothers who became a great warrior. And Samson, the physically powerful Nazirite judge whose catastrophic weakness for women cost him his eyes, his freedom, and ultimately his life, though he brought down the temple of Dagon on himself and his captors in his death. The book of Judges ends with a grim summary. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Into this chaotic era came a woman named Hannah, who prayed at the tabernacle with such desperate intensity that the priest Eli thought she was drunk. She was weeping and moving her lips without making a sound. She had made a vow to God. If he gave her a son, she would give the child back to God all the days of his life. God remembered her. She conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, meaning heard by God. When he was old enough, she brought him to Eli at the tabernacle and left him there to serve. Each year when she came for the annual sacrifice, she brought him a new robe she had made. Samuel grew, and God was with him, and the word of the Lord came to him one night when he was still young. He thought it was Eli calling him in the dark. 3 times he got up and went to Eli. The 3rd time, Eli understood. He told the boy, "Go back and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" God called Samuel's name. Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." God gave Samuel a message about the judgment coming on Eli's house. Samuel was afraid to tell Eli in the morning, but Eli asked him directly and told him to hide nothing. Samuel told him everything. Eli said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." Samuel grew up. All Israel recognized him as a prophet of God from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. When Samuel was old, the elders of Israel came to him and said, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king for us to judge us like all the other nations." Samuel was displeased and prayed to God. God said, "They have not rejected you. They have rejected me as their king. They have done this to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt. Do as they say, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who reigns over them will do." Samuel warned them, "The king will take your sons for his armies, your daughters for his household, your best fields and vineyards, 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards, your servants and your livestock. You yourselves will become his slaves. And when you cry out, the Lord will not answer you." The people said, "No. We want a king over us, so we can be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." And God said to Samuel, "Listen to them and give them a king." The man God chose was from the tribe of Benjamin, tall and handsome, head and shoulders above everyone else. His name was Saul. Samuel anointed him privately first, pouring oil over his head, saying, "The Lord has anointed you ruler over his people Israel." Then Saul was presented publicly, and all the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Saul started well. He won military victories and unified the tribes. But over time his obedience grew conditional. He offered a sacrifice only priests were permitted to offer because he was afraid the army would scatter before Samuel arrived. He spared the Amalekite king and the best livestock against God's explicit command, then tried to explain it away as saving the animals for sacrifice. Samuel said to him, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." Saul begged Samuel not to leave him, but it was done. The Lord had rejected Saul as king of Israel. God sent Samuel to Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse, because he had chosen one of Jesse's sons to be the next king. God told Samuel not to look at appearance or height. People look at outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Jesse brought his sons before Samuel one by one, 7 sons, and none of them was the one. Samuel asked Jesse if there were any other sons. Jesse said, "There is still the youngest, but he is out tending the sheep." "Send for him," Samuel said. He was brought in. He was handsome and ruddy, with beautiful eyes. God told Samuel, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. His name was David. David's story is the longest, most detailed, most complex biography in the Hebrew Bible. He is shepherd, poet, musician, warrior, king, adulterer, murderer, penitent, and saint, sometimes all within the same chapter. He is called a man after God's own heart, not because he was perfect, but because when he fell, he came back. The most famous episode of his early life came before his anointing was publicly known. The Philistine army was arrayed against Israel on one side of a valley, Israel's army on the other. A Philistine champion named Goliath came out each morning and evening for 40 days and challenged Israel to send someone to fight him. He was over 9 feet tall by some estimates. He wore bronze armor and carried a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. No one in Israel accepted the challenge. David came to the camp to bring food to his brothers. He heard Goliath's challenge and could not understand why no one was doing anything about it. King Saul sent for him. David told Saul he had killed lions and bears that attacked his father's sheep. This Philistine would be like one of them. Saul put his own armor on David. David took it off. He went to a stream and chose 5 smooth stones and put them in his shepherd's pouch. He took his sling, and he went out to meet Goliath. Goliath looked at him and laughed. He was a boy. He cursed David by his gods. He said he would give his flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." He ran toward Goliath. He reached into his pouch. He slung a stone. It struck Goliath on the forehead, and the giant fell face down on the ground. David took Goliath's own sword and killed him with it. The Philistines fled, Israel pursued them, and the people celebrated David. That celebration frightened Saul deeply. He heard the women singing and dancing, saying, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." From that day on, Saul was jealous of David. He tried to kill him. He hunted him across the wilderness for years, while David gathered a band of loyal men and refused, despite multiple opportunities, to raise his hand against the Lord's anointed king. Saul's reign ended when the Philistines defeated Israel in battle. Saul, badly wounded and afraid of capture, fell on his own sword. David was made king of Judah first. Then, after years of conflict with Saul's remaining house, all the tribes came to him and made him king over all Israel. He was 30 years old. He would reign for 40 years. He captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites and made it his capital city, bringing the Ark of the Covenant there in a great procession. He danced before the Ark with all his might as it came into the city. His wife Michal, Saul's daughter, saw him from a window and despised him for it. When she confronted him, he said, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house. I will celebrate before the Lord." David wanted to build a permanent temple for God. God told him, "No, you have shed much blood and have fought many wars. Your son, a man of peace, will be the one to build my house." But God made David a covenant. "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." David's reign was the military high point of ancient Israel. He subdued the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, the Edomites, and the Ammonites. The kingdom stretched from the Euphrates in the north to the border of Egypt in the south. But power brought a terrible failure. One spring, when kings go out to war, David stayed in Jerusalem while his army fought. One evening he walked on the roof of his palace and saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful. He sent for her. Her name was Bathsheba, and she was the wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers who was at that moment fighting for the king in the field. Bathsheba became pregnant. David summoned Uriah home, hoping he would sleep with his wife and the child would be thought his. Uriah refused, out of military solidarity with his fellow soldiers who had no such comfort. David sent Uriah back to the front with a sealed letter for the commander, ordering the commander to place Uriah at the front of the fiercest fighting and then withdraw so he would be killed. Uriah died. David took Bathsheba as his wife, and God sent the prophet Nathan to David. Nathan told David a story. There was a rich man with many flocks, and a poor man who had nothing but one little ewe lamb that he had raised like a daughter. When a traveler came to the rich man took the poor man's lamb and served it to his guest. David burned with anger. He said, "The man who did this deserves to die." Nathan said, "You are the man." David said, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan said, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die. But the child who will be born to you will die." The child became ill and died 7 days after birth. What follows in the Psalms and in the historical books is one of the most transparent portraits of a human soul in all of ancient literature. David wrote Psalm 51 after Nathan confronted him. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned." The psalm is an act of complete, undefended confession. David did not explain himself. He did not justify himself. He laid himself before God exactly as he was. David and Bathsheba had another son. His name was Solomon. David's family was tormented by violence and rebellion in his later years, in part because of what Nathan had prophesied as a consequence of his sin. His son Absalom led an armed rebellion against him and drove David out of Jerusalem. David wept as he fled. But Absalom was defeated and killed by David's general Joab against David's explicit command to deal gently with the boy. When David heard that Absalom was dead, he went to his chamber and wept. He said, "Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Absalom, my son, my son." David eventually returned to Jerusalem. He reigned until he was old and full of years. Before he died, he charged Solomon to walk in God's ways, to keep his commands and decrees and laws as written in the law of Moses, so that God might keep the promise he had made. He gave Solomon the plans for the temple, the plans that God had given him but that he had not been permitted to build. The stone, the wood, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, all prepared. "Go and build," he said. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. Solomon his son succeeded him as king. Solomon began with a dream. God appeared to him at Gibeon and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon said, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." God was pleased. He said, "Since you have asked for wisdom rather than long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked, and I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." Solomon's wisdom became legendary throughout the ancient world. He settled disputes with uncanny insight. Kings and queens traveled from distant lands to test him. The Queen of Sheba came with hard questions and left breathless, saying she had not believed what she had heard until she saw it with her own eyes. He wrote thousands of proverbs and over 1,000 songs. He oversaw the construction of the temple, the great project his father had prepared for, and that God had reserved for him. It took 7 years to build. When it was finished and the Ark of the Covenant was brought in, the cloud of God's glory filled the temple so completely that the priests could not stand to perform their service. Solomon prayed at the dedication. He asked God to hear the prayers offered at this place, for Israel and even for foreigners who came to pray here, so that all the peoples of the earth would know God's name. God appeared to Solomon again and said, "I have heard your prayer. I have consecrated this temple by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there." But then God added a warning. "If you or your sons turn away from me and follow other gods and worship them, I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated." The warning would prove necessary. As Solomon aged, he was drawn by his hundreds of foreign wives into the worship of their gods, the very thing Moses had warned about, the very thing the law had prohibited. He built high places for Chemosh and Molech and Ashtoreth on the hills around Jerusalem, and he burned incense and offered sacrifices to them. God told Solomon that he would tear the kingdom away from his line after his death. For the sake of David, he would leave one tribe for Solomon's son, but the rest would go to another. Solomon died after a reign of 40 years, and the kingdom split. 10 of the 12 tribes followed a man named Jeroboam and formed the northern kingdom of Israel. 2 tribes stayed with Solomon's son Rehoboam and formed the southern kingdom of Judah. What followed was several centuries of parallel history, 2 kingdoms with their own kings, their own armies, their own alternating seasons of faithfulness and idolatry. The north never had a good king. Not one of its 19 kings is described as doing right in the eyes of the Lord. The prophets Elijah and Elisha ministered in the north during this period, confronting kings, challenging idolatry, performing miracles, and calling the people back to the God of their ancestors. Elijah stood against 850 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in one of the most dramatic showdowns in Scripture, calling fire from heaven. And then, exhausted and afraid in the aftermath, sat under a broom tree and asked to die. God sent an angel. The angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat. The journey is too much for you." He ate, rested, and walked 40 days to the mountain of God. The south had a mixed record. A handful of its kings were faithful, notably Hezekiah and Josiah, who tore down the idols and brought the people back to the law. Most drifted. Several were openly wicked. The prophets kept speaking. Isaiah wrote of a coming servant who would be despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering, familiar with pain, who would take up human infirmities and carry human sorrows, who would be pierced for human transgressions, crushed for human iniquities, and by whose wounds people would be healed. He described a future king called the Prince of Peace, upon whom the government would rest, whose kingdom would have no end. Jeremiah wept. He is called the weeping prophet for good reason. He preached in Jerusalem as the Babylonians closed in, telling the people exactly what was coming, being thrown into a cistern for his trouble, forbidden by God from even praying for his people because their judgment was sealed. He watched the city he loved be destroyed. He wrote Lamentations, a series of funeral poems for a city. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. But Jeremiah also wrote one of the most hopeful passages in the Old Testament. He wrote it while he was in prison, with the Babylonian army surrounding the city. He was told to buy a field in the besieged land as a sign of what God had promised. He wrote, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." The northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrian Empire in 722 BC. Its people were deported and scattered among the nations, and they largely disappeared from history. The 10 lost tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah held on longer, but in 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem, broke through its walls, burned the city, and destroyed the temple Solomon had built. The Ark of the Covenant disappears from the historical record at this point. The leading citizens of Judah were marched to Babylon in chains. Psalm 137 captures what that felt like. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the willows we hung our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? In Babylon, a young man from a noble family of Judah was selected for training in the Babylonian court. His Babylonian name was Belteshazzar. His Hebrew name was Daniel. Daniel and 3 of his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, refused to eat the king's food, which would have violated Jewish dietary laws. Daniel asked permission to eat only vegetables and water for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who ate the royal food, so they were allowed to continue. God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that none of his magicians or astrologers could interpret. He threatened to have them all executed. Daniel asked for time and went home to pray with his 3 friends. During the night, God revealed the mystery to Daniel in a vision. Daniel went to Nebuchadnezzar and told him not only the interpretation of the dream, but the dream itself. There was a great statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. A stone cut without human hands struck the feet and shattered the whole thing, and the stone became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel told him, the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar himself. Each section represented a kingdom to come, each less glorious than the last, and the stone that smashed them all represented a kingdom that would never be destroyed, set up by God himself, that would endure forever. Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face before Daniel and said, "Your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." Daniel's 3 friends faced their own trial. Nebuchadnezzar built a golden statue 90 feet tall and commanded everyone to bow before it when the music played. Those who refused would be thrown into a blazing furnace. The music played. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, now called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, did not bow. Nebuchadnezzar was furious. He had the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. It was so hot that the soldiers who threw the 3 men in were killed by the heat. Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace. He leaped to his feet. He said, "Were there not 3 men we threw in? Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." He called them out. Their hair was not singed, their robes were not scorched, they did not even smell of fire. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Daniel himself later served under Darius the Mede, who followed Nebuchadnezzar. The administrators who were jealous of Daniel's position convinced Darius to sign a law making it illegal to pray to anyone but the king for 30 days. Anyone who violated it would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel went home and prayed 3 times a day, just as he always had, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He was arrested and brought to Darius. Darius was distressed. He tried all day to find a way to rescue Daniel, but the law could not be changed even by the king. Daniel was thrown to the lions. Darius went home, refused food, and could not sleep. At the first light of dawn he ran to the lion's den and called, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to rescue you?" A voice answered from the den, "My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions." Daniel was lifted out. He was completely unharmed. Darius wrote to all the peoples of the earth in every language. "In every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. He is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end." 50 years after the exile began, a new empire rose. Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BC, and in his first year as king, Cyrus issued a proclamation. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says: "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem and build the temple, and may their God be with them." The exiles could go home. Isaiah had written about this moment 2 centuries before it happened. He had named Cyrus by name. He had written, "He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, 'Let it be rebuilt,' and of the temple, 'Let its foundations be laid.'" The Jews who returned found Jerusalem in ruins. The walls were broken down, the gates burned, the temple was gone. A small group of returned exiles, led by a man named Zerubbabel, began rebuilding the temple. When the foundation was laid, the older priests and heads of families who had seen the first temple wept aloud. Others shouted for joy. No one could tell the difference between the weeping and the shouting. The sound was heard far away. Decades later, a man named Ezra, a priest and scribe expert in the law of Moses, came from Babylon to Jerusalem and found the people had again intermarried with the surrounding peoples and adopted their practices. He tore his robe and his cloak, pulled hair from his head and beard, and sat down appalled until the evening sacrifice. Then he fell on his knees and spread his hands to God and poured out a long, anguished prayer of confession on behalf of the whole people. The people wept bitterly with him. They made a covenant to put things right. Then came Nehemiah, cupbearer to the Persian king Artaxerxes. He had received news that Jerusalem's walls were still broken down and its gates still burned. He sat down and wept and mourned for days. He prayed. Then he went to the king with a request. "Send me to Jerusalem," he said, "to rebuild it." The king granted his request. Nehemiah organized the returned exiles to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They worked with a trowel in one hand and a weapon in the other, guarding against enemies who tried to stop the construction. They finished the entire wall in 52 days. When the wall was complete, all the people gathered as one in the square before the water gate. They asked Ezra to bring out the book of the law of Moses. He stood on a high wooden platform made for the occasion and read from daybreak until noon, from the law of God, while the Levites helped the people understand it. The people wept as they heard the words of the law. Nehemiah said, "Do not weep. This day is holy. Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks. Share with those who have nothing. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The Old Testament closes with the prophet Malachi. The name means my messenger, and his words are pointed, questioning, challenging. God speaks through him to a people who are going through the motions of faith without the substance. They are offering blemished animals in sacrifice and wondering why God is not responding. They are faithless to their wives. They are robbing God by withholding the tithe. They are weary of God's service. But Malachi also ends with a forward-looking promise. Those who feared the Lord spoke with each other, and the Lord listened. A scroll of remembrance was written before him. "They will be mine," says the Lord Almighty, "on the day I make my treasured possession. I will spare them, just as a father has compassion on his son who serves him." And at the very end, "See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers." And then silence. 400 years of silence. No prophet speaks. No new scripture is written. The people of God live under Persian rule, then Greek rule, then the brief, violent independence of the Maccabees, then Roman rule. They wait. The story is not finished. The promises have not all been fulfilled. The new covenant Jeremiah wrote about from prison has not yet arrived. The Prince of Peace Isaiah described has not yet come. The eternal kingdom Daniel saw in vision has not yet appeared. But the God who called Abraham out of Ur and Moses from a burning bush, and David from a hillside full of sheep, and Daniel from a lion's den, is not finished. He is never finished. Something is coming, and it will change everything. Good night. Rest now. You are held by the same love that has been holding his people since the very beginning. Since before the world was made, you were known, and you are not forgotten. Sleep well. Please consider subscribing so you do not miss videos in the future, and leave a like if you enjoyed this. Have a great night, and God bless you all.